The world burned in silence. Smoke drifted lazily through the shattered glass dome that once protected Vaila's family estate. Her vision flickered, blurred by pain and tears she couldn't shed. Her body had stopped responding months ago, ever since the spinal burst virus had taken her legs, then her arms, then her voice. Only her thoughts remained, her awareness intact within the cage of her own failing body. She lay in the corner of a crumbling chamber, propped up on what was once a ceremonial cradle. The air was thick with dust and the sharp scent of plasma burns. The war had not reached this district for weeks. Then, within an hour, it was everywhere. Her family's voices had screamed across the private network, urgent and afraid. She waited for someone to come for her. She heard the thumping of boots, the crashing of possessions, the roar of the family escape vessel preparing to launch. They would come. They always said she was still one of them, despite her condition. Her mother told her every cycle that she was loved. Her father kissed her forehead the last time they spoke. Even her older brother used to hum songs beside her bed. Vaila replayed those memories as the sky outside darkened with falling ships. She counted the minutes. Then hours. No one came. The silent agony in her mind turned into confusion, then disbelief. Not even a servant. The emergency beacon she had activated blinked weakly beside her, still functioning. Still unanswered. She stretched her senses across the family's telepathic line. Static. Nothing. She tried again. A whisper this time. Mother. Father. I'm here. I'm still here. No answer. She began to understand. They had left. Not forgotten her. Abandoned her. The realization was not sudden. It was slow, crawling up her chest like the cold fingers of the night. They'd left her because she was too weak, too broken, too inconvenient to carry. Her hover chair was damaged in the last quake. She couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Couldn't follow. Her people, so proud of their superiority, their evolved minds, had no room for those who could not contribute. Vaila had once been brilliant, a prodigy in psychic composition. But disease took that too. No longer a mind worth reading, just a burden with eyes. She had hoped, truly hoped, that her family would love her beyond function. But function was everything in Televari culture. Those who couldn't lift themselves were left to fade, quietly, honorably. Vaila did not feel honored. She felt terrified. The house groaned with stress as energy shields collapsed and walls split. The floor trembled beneath her still body. Somewhere close, something exploded. Ash drifted through the air like snow. Shadows passed over the dome as scavenger drones circled above. She began whispering to herself. Fragments of memory. Nursery rhymes. Names of the stars. Her thoughts grew louder, bouncing back at her in the empty chamber. No voices answered. Her once vibrant telepathic network, once filled with warmth and intellect, was a graveyard of echoes. I don't want to die here, she said into the silence. Please. Anyone. I'm still alive. She focused all her mental strength, what little she had left, and fired a raw psychic pulse into the dark sky. It wasn't words, just a scream. A signal that someone, somewhere, might hear. Her body shook from the effort. Her vision dimmed. She remembered a time when her father took her to the observatory tower. He told her humans were unpredictable, dangerous, emotional creatures. He said they were primitive but capable of shocking beauty. He said they helped their sick, sometimes even when it made no sense. She never understood why that fascinated him. Now she clung to the idea. Maybe one of them would come. Her heart beat slower. Her breathing shallowed. But her mind stayed clear. A strange comfort arrived with the numbness. Not peace, but release. The kind that comes when there's nothing else to fear. No more disappointment. No more waiting. No more shame. She looked up through the shattered dome and watched the stars shimmer. They didn't care about her suffering. But maybe, just maybe, someone beneath them did. The floor cracked. A support beam crashed beside her, sending up a cloud of dust that made her choke. She couldn't raise a hand to cover her mouth. Couldn't move to safety. She coughed dryly, painfully. A warning. Her time was nearly up. She used what was left of her power to direct one last message into the void. Not in her own language. She tried to mimic the strange human phrases she'd once studied. "Help me!" It was clumsy, broken. But maybe it would be enough. Then she closed her eyes. And waited for the end. The human rescue unit had been dispatched to the outer fringe of the fallen Televari district after picking up faint psychic tremors across their emergency monitoring systems. Though most alien transmissions were unreadable, this one was different. It carried not commands or coordinates, but raw, unfocused desperation, something that didn't need translation. Captain Reed, a hardened veteran of interstellar rescue missions, reviewed the signal data twice. Then he rerouted his drop team without hesitation. It wasn't protocol to act on a signal with no metadata, no verified coordinates, and no active distress code. But something about the psychic echo had triggered a deep instinct. It felt human. It felt like someone screaming with everything they had left. When Reed and his team arrived, they found ruins. Buildings lay in tangled heaps of black metal and crystal. Televari Estates, once the pride of galactic engineering, had been torn apart by orbital strikes and internal sabotage. The war hadn't been clean. The Televari government had collapsed in days, their own hierarchy choosing annihilation over surrender. Survivors were rare, and most wouldn't risk helping one another. The team split into search units, combing each building with infrared scans and pulse sensor sweeps. They expected empty corridors, maybe a few bodies. Instead, one of the junior scouts detected a faint life reading beneath a collapsed support dome. Oxygen was low. Radiation levels rising. No motion. But a heartbeat. The rescue protocol kicked in. They drilled through debris with plasma cutters and reinforced the weak structure with stabilizers. Reed personally descended into the hollowed-out chamber, unsure what he would find. He didn't expect a small alien girl, curled in a cradle of shattered marble and dust, barely breathing, her body unmoving. Her skin was pale with Televari iridescence, but her expression, wide eyes frozen in sorrow, hit him harder than anything he'd seen on the battlefield. She wasn't dead. Not yet. He called for the evac cradle, a portable life support shell designed for high-risk transfers. His team secured her gently, treating her like the most fragile relic of an ancient world. She didn't react to light, sound, or touch. But her mind, Reed could feel it, was active. She was still inside. Alone. Terrified. And waiting. They carried her aboard the human dropship, which lifted off just as the surrounding structure began to collapse behind them. No one spoke during the flight back. Even the medics worked silently, scanning her brainwaves and vital patterns. Everything about her indicated full paralysis, except the remarkable neural activity, a storm of thought trapped inside a prison of failed biology. Back on the orbital medbay station, the girl was stabilized, monitored, and scanned extensively. She had no documentation, no clan markers. The Televari database was gone, wiped in the war. Technically, she didn't exist anymore. No family records, no legal standing. Just a name scribbled in one of the salvage files, Vaila. A whisper retrieved from what little psychic residue the medtechs could decode. Vaila. Reed found himself returning to her medchamber every day. The girl never moved. Never blinked. But the monitors showed stable vitals. Her mind was still active, though slipping into dream state patterns from time to time. He couldn't explain the pull he felt toward her, just that when he looked into those eyes, something inside him felt seen. She had been left to die. Not in war, but by her own people. The way she had been discarded disturbed the entire medical team. No attempt had been made to recover her. Not a single Televari vessel had inquired about civilian rescues. And no distress beacon on her body had been registered with Central Command. She had sent out that scream alone, untrained and unaided. A miracle it had been caught at all. One of the station's empathy translators, a neural technician named Harper, tried to interface directly with Vaila's mind using a psycholink. The connection nearly overwhelmed Harper. She described the mental space as pure grief, layered with abandonment and quiet terror. Vaila had survived only through fierce mental discipline, repeating thoughts like mantras, forming patterns to hold herself together. Not as a soldier. As a child who refused to die unloved. Word spread. A human child psychologist was brought in to assist, not to treat her body but to support her awareness. Reed authorized it personally. The girl was taught Earth languages through passive telepathic exposure. She absorbed them faster than expected. She couldn't speak or move, but she could respond, through carefully modulated thought, through blinking with implanted neural sensors, and eventually through predictive language mapping. Weeks passed. Then came the first sentence. "Why did they leave me?" It broke Reed in a way no combat mission ever had. There was no easy answer. The truth was cruel, too sharp for a child to hold. But Reed didn't lie. He sat beside her, explained how some people make wrong choices, even when it hurts others. He told her that pain doesn't define worth. That survival wasn't shameful. That she mattered now, here, to them. And most importantly, that she hadn't been forgotten. Vaila began asking more. About Earth. About music. About the oceans. About the way humans buried their dead. Not out of fear, but out of ritual. Out of respect. She asked what a family really meant. Reed answered the best he could. He told her family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was who stayed when others ran. He visited every day. And every day, she remembered more words. Until one day she said, "Thank you for hearing me." And he replied, "We hear you, Vaila. You're not alone anymore." The team's bond with Vaila deepened in ways none of them anticipated. As time passed, her silent struggle transformed into a quiet determination. She had been abandoned, lost in a galaxy that had no place for her, but now she found herself within the fold of humanity. For the first time in her life, there were no weapons pointed at her, no harsh judgments from her own kind. Just warmth, acceptance, and a steady rhythm of care. Reed watched as the other crew members began to open up to her, a subtle shift occurring among them. She was no longer just a casualty of war, she was a person, a being who had a future, even if it was uncertain. The psychological assessments came back with surprising results. Vaila's neural patterns, once erratic and fragmented, were stabilizing. Her mind, though scarred, was adapting. The trauma of her abandonment had been profound, but she was resilient. Even though she couldn't walk or speak, she communicated with a clarity that transcended her physical limitations. Her telepathic interactions with Reed and the medical team were becoming more coherent, more complex. The once unreadable storm of emotions inside her was now contained in structured thoughts, fragments of memories, desires, and hopes. Yet there was a part of her that still held back. She had learned to trust them, but the shadows of her past remained a barrier. It was as if she feared that the warmth she now experienced would slip away as quickly as it had come. Reed noticed the hesitation. She would engage in conversation, her thoughts flowing easily when asked about her newfound interest in Earth's cultures, but when the topic shifted to her past, she withdrew, her mental presence dimming like a fading star. Reed wasn't sure what to do. He could only speak to her with the language he knew best: patience. He knew that healing was a slow process, that some wounds went deeper than physical trauma, and that it would take time for Vaila to confront the things she had buried inside. But time wasn't something they had in abundance. The war with the Televari Empire had left a gaping hole in the galaxy's political structure, and humanity, though not a participant in the conflict, was now a target for various factions seeking dominance. Reed's crew was often called upon to mediate, rescue, and sometimes fight. They weren't diplomats or peacemakers. They were survivors, and so far, their track record had been perfect. Yet, Vaila represented something more than just survival. She was a symbol. A living reminder of the price of conflict, of the cost of neglect. Her existence posed a question: what was humanity willing to do for someone like her? Was it merely pity that drove them to help her, or was it something more, a deeper, unspoken commitment to protect those who had no voice? Reed had spent his entire career in the shadows of war, always fighting, always looking ahead to the next mission. But in Vaila's eyes he saw something that made him question his place in the universe. She was a child, a casualty of a war that hadn't even been hers to fight. Her only crime had been existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, and yet she had endured. She had survived when so many would have broken. And for the first time, Reed realized that survival alone wasn't enough. There had to be more. There had to be a reason to keep fighting beyond just the next battle. Vaila's growth wasn't immediate, but it was steady. She became more curious about the world around her. Her questions shifted from a childlike wonder to a more profound, reflective interest in the human condition. She asked about human history, about the stories of sacrifice and resilience that defined humanity's journey across the stars. She wanted to know about loss, love, and hope, concepts that seemed alien to her but somehow resonated with her own experiences. Reed found himself becoming her anchor, her touchstone in a world that was as foreign to her as the stars themselves. He began to speak to her more openly, telling her stories about Earth, about human history, about the complexities of what it meant to be part of a species that had experienced its own cycles of destruction and rebirth. He explained the core values of humanity: compassion, unity, and the belief in redemption. He told her about Earth's turbulent history, about the wars fought and the peace that followed. In those stories, Vaila found echoes of her own struggle, a struggle to find purpose, to belong, to rebuild. But it wasn't just Reed who spoke to her. The entire crew began to form a silent bond with her. The medics, who had once only viewed her as a patient, now saw her as a person. Harper, the empathy translator, spent countless hours engaging with her telepathically, helping Vaila explore the recesses of her memories, allowing her to process the trauma she had suffered. Slowly, the girl began to form new thoughts, new hopes. She asked about human art, about the way people expressed their emotions through music, paintings, and stories. These questions hinted at a desire to heal, to create something new, something beautiful, despite the devastation she had known. But even as Vaila opened up, Reed knew that the darkness of her past was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind. Her people had abandoned her, left her to die in a war they had started. And while the humans had taken her in, Reed knew it was a temporary refuge. He couldn't protect her forever. He didn't know what would happen if they ever returned to Televari space. The Televari Empire might want her back, maybe to use her as a tool for their own political games, or worse, to erase any trace of her existence. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and Reed couldn't guarantee Vaila's safety forever. But he promised her one thing, that as long as she was under his watch, she would never feel abandoned again. She would never have to face the darkness alone. Vaila, for the first time in her life, had a family. A real one. The crew had become her new home, and they had made it clear that she was no longer a casualty, no longer a victim. She was one of them. She was human, in their eyes, and they would do whatever it took to ensure she never felt the sting of isolation again. It wasn't a perfect solution. Vaila's past would never disappear. Her trauma was written into her soul, and it would take years, if not decades, to fully heal. But for now, she had found a place where she was safe. A place where she belonged. And as Reed looked at her, sitting quietly, her thoughts no longer a storm but a calm river, he realized that sometimes the most important thing a person, or an alien, could have was not strength or power, but the simple knowledge that they were not alone. Vaila's transformation was more than just emotional, it was a complete evolution of self. As the months passed, she no longer looked at herself as the helpless, abandoned girl from the Televari Empire. Her identity had been forged by more than just the scars of war. It had been shaped by the people who cared for her, by the kindness she had received from those who, like her, were trying to navigate the chaos of a galaxy broken by endless conflict. Slowly, she began to see her place not just within the human crew, but within the broader context of the universe itself. Her telepathic abilities continued to develop at an astonishing rate. What had once been mere flashes of thought had become full conversations, and Viola's emotional state began to stabilize in ways that Reed had never thought possible. She no longer recoiled at the touch of others, no longer flinched when someone came too close. The physical paralysis she had suffered in the aftermath of her ordeal was still present, but it was no longer a barrier between her and the world. It was as if the very act of being cared for had unlocked a part of her that had been dormant for far too long. She could now communicate with more than just the crew. She began to reach out to others, other species she encountered on their travels. Her interactions were no longer confined to just the humans around her. She was slowly becoming a bridge between the worlds, a representative of the possibility that there could be peace, that there could be healing. But as much as Viola grew, she could not forget the past. There were moments when the shadows returned, when the painful memories of abandonment and betrayal clouded her thoughts. She would retreat into herself, her mind closing off like a flower closing its petals in the dark. Those around her could see it, Reed could feel it, when the light in her eyes dimmed, when the warmth of her presence seemed to vanish. It was as if her mind would return to the cold void from which she had come, and there was nothing anyone could do to reach her. Those times were the hardest for Reed. He had come to care for her deeply. In the quiet moments when they sat together, their minds touching in a bond stronger than any spoken word, he saw the vulnerability she hid beneath the facade of strength she had worked so hard to build. Yet despite these setbacks, Viola's resilience never faltered. Each time she retreated, she always returned, stronger than before. She began to ask questions again, to share her thoughts with Reed and the others. The crew watched as she grew, and there was something almost miraculous about the process. It was not just her recovery. It was the way she touched those around her, the way her presence demanded that others reflect on their own lives, their own choices. For Viola, her healing wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about understanding who she was, who she had been, and where she could go from here. Her questions, once filled with uncertainty and pain, began to shift. She no longer asked about Earth and human culture out of a desire to find meaning in the things she had lost. Now, she asked about the future. What could she become? What role could she play in the galaxy now that she had found a new home, a new family? It was during one of these discussions that Reed had an epiphany. Viola, in her quiet, unassuming way, had found the one thing that he himself had been searching for all along, a reason to live, a purpose greater than the fight for survival. She didn't just want to exist in the galaxy, she wanted to make a difference, to stand as a symbol of something better, something more than the war-torn remnants of her people. Reed's team, once a ragtag group of survivors with no place in the larger galactic conflict, now had something to fight for. They weren't just mercenaries or diplomats. They were protectors of a new hope. Viola had reminded them of the power of compassion, of the ability to heal even the most broken parts of a person. She had, in turn, made them question what they were truly fighting for. If they could fight for someone like her, someone who had been forsaken, someone who had no place to call home, then they could fight for anything. The decision came quietly, one night after a particularly long mission. They were preparing to head to a system that had been ravaged by the ongoing war, a place where Viola's people were rumored to be hiding. The Televari Empire had never been kind to the weak, and they had always regarded Viola as little more than a tool to be used or discarded. Reed knew that they would encounter enemies there, enemies who would see Viola not as a person, but as a threat, a living reminder of their failed war efforts. But for the first time, Reed didn't view the mission as a simple objective. He wasn't leading a team to fight for money, for political gain, or even for survival. This time, they were fighting for something more. They were fighting to ensure that Viola, and others like her, would never again be abandoned, never again left to fend for themselves in a galaxy that had forgotten them. As they made their way to the system, the crew discussed what they would do once they arrived. Viola's telepathic abilities had grown to the point where she could communicate with other races, and it was clear to Reed that she would play a pivotal role in their efforts. She had the potential to bridge the gap between the Televari and the humans, to offer a chance for peace where none had existed before. But the risk was high. The Televari might not want peace. They might see her as a traitor or an enemy, someone who had turned her back on them. Reed understood the dangers, but he also understood something else, that Viola's future wasn't something they could afford to ignore. She had chosen her own path. She had chosen humanity, and now they would stand by her, no matter the cost. When they finally reached the Televari stronghold, the tension was palpable. The crew prepared for a confrontation, but as Reed looked at Viola, sitting silently in the corner, he realized that they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much more important, a chance for redemption, for a better future. And in that moment, Reed knew that no matter what happened next, they would never abandon her. Viola's journey had only just begun, and it was a journey they would take together. The final chapter of Viola's story wasn't defined by her own struggle, but by the profound impact she had on the world around her. What had begun as a journey of survival, one marked by abandonment and betrayal, transformed into a narrative of hope, resilience, and unity. Viola was no longer just the abandoned alien girl, paralyzed and isolated in a vast, indifferent galaxy. She had become a symbol of what it meant to overcome, to heal, and to embrace the possibility of redemption, not just for herself, but for those around her. The crew, once simply her rescuers, had become her family, bound together by their shared purpose, their shared understanding that the struggle for survival was not an end in itself, but a stepping stone to something greater. As the events in the Televari system unfolded, the sheer weight of what Viola had become hit home for Reed and the others. Their mission, once focused on survival and the pursuit of an objective, had now evolved into something much more complex. They weren't just fighting to protect Viola, they were fighting to protect the very ideals she represented. For the first time, Reed understood the true meaning of their fight. They were standing for the possibility of peace, for the belief that even in the most fractured of systems, even in the most broken of souls, there could be healing and transformation. Viola had become something more than just a victim. She had become a force in her own right. Her telepathic abilities, once a source of great pain and confusion, had grown into an incredible tool for communication and understanding. She could reach across species, across divisions, and touch the hearts of those who had once seen her as nothing more than a casualty of war. She was the living embodiment of what humanity could offer: compassion, understanding, and the power to bridge gaps that once seemed insurmountable. But despite her growth, Viola was still haunted by the echoes of her past. The trauma of her abandonment, the wounds left by her own people, were not easily forgotten. There were nights when the pain resurfaced, when the weight of everything she had endured threatened to crush her once again. In these moments, Reed could only stand by her, offering what comfort he could. But Viola had changed in ways that were far more profound than just her emotional growth. She had learned to lean on others, to accept their care and support, and in doing so, she had become stronger than she had ever imagined. The day came when the crew found themselves face to face with the Televari leaders, the very ones who had once cast Viola aside. They had learned of her survival and her transformation, and they saw her not as the weak, discarded child they had once known, but as a powerful symbol of something they could never have imagined: strength, not through violence, but through unity and compassion. The Televari, long accustomed to maintaining power through fear and control, now saw that they were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. The very people they had once looked down upon were now standing tall, united in a cause that transcended the traditional boundaries of power and conquest. As negotiations began, it became clear that Viola had become more than just an emissary for humanity. She had become the face of a new era. Her words, though soft and measured, carried the weight of everything she had endured. The Televari leaders, who had once disregarded her as a mere tool of war, now listened with rapt attention as she spoke. She was no longer a broken alien girl. She was a beacon of what could be achieved when individuals chose to heal, to move forward, to seek something greater than the cycle of vengeance and conflict that had defined so much of the galaxy's history. In those moments, it wasn't just her telepathic powers that made her influential. It was her very presence, the way she embodied the best qualities of humanity. It was clear to everyone in the room that Viola, though an alien, had become the embodiment of what it meant to be human, not just capable of great destruction, but also capable of great love, of compassion, of rebuilding what had been lost. Her vulnerability, her strength, and her ability to forgive the galaxy for its wrongs were what truly set her apart. In the end, the Televari agreed to a ceasefire, not because they feared the power of Reed's crew, not because they feared the weapons at their disposal, but because they had been confronted with something far more powerful than force: the possibility of peace. Vaila had shown them that there was more to the galaxy than domination and conquest. She had shown them that survival wasn't enough, that it was the will to connect, to heal, and to build something better that would ultimately define the future of their species. The victory was not one of battle, it was a victory of spirit. Vaila had saved herself, but in doing so, she had saved those around her, including Reed and his crew. Their journey, once driven by the need to survive, had evolved into a quest for something far more meaningful. And through it all, Vaila had remained at the center of it, her quiet strength the glue that held them all together. As the crew stood together in the aftermath of the negotiations, looking out at the stars, Reed felt a deep sense of gratitude. Vaila had not only become a part of their team, she had become a part of their hearts. The journey had been long, filled with hardship and pain, but in the end, it had all been worth it. They had found something they hadn't known they were looking for: a family, a purpose, and a future. And in that future, there was one undeniable truth: no matter how broken the galaxy seemed, no matter how dark the days ahead, as long as they had each other, they would never be alone.